Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Great Plains Wildlife Reserve, where today we are laying the groundwork for the future. But first, check out some of these tiny little pronghorns. These guys, or gals I should say, almost always give birth to twins, so we have a much more active habitat at the moment. So far here at the Plains Reserve, we have been sticking relatively close to the entrance, utilising that initial electricity radius and making life easier for our keepers. But we have reached a point where habitats that I want to build are in need of a slightly different requirement, mainly a water source. So I will be setting that up here today, hopefully for the next few episodes to make use of. Now this is a tiered river, the reason for which will become apparent in a future episode, but just for now, all we need to know is that it will be used for a number of species. This river will be quite a bit larger at the top, which will make sense eventually. But I've also included this into the planning as it will create a runoff further upstream, which will create a wetlands of sorts. It's going to be a very diverse area with a bit of a woodland, some river, wetlands, grassland. Very nice. Today's episode was originally supposed to be for a different species, but due to a bit of a financial crisis, let's say, the plan changed. However, the original design does still show the path in layout and some of the loose woodland locations and ultimately the intended locations of the next 4 species to be introduced. So where we were going to build for B, we are now building for A, or the American alligators. As always, before we jump into the video, if you enjoyed today's build, likes are always appreciated. If you want to see more, you can, of course, subscribe, and head down to the comments for name suggestions for today's alligators. I think we have 1 male and 3 females at the moment that all need new titles, so let me know your best ideas. As it stands, we've got names for 2 of our pronghorn antelope at the moment, both submitted by Zekomapic. Say hello to Dusty and Oriana. We still have a few females without names, so feel free to add any more for those as well. I'll leave them open for now for any newcomers, maybe, to the channel. Anyone want to submit one for them? They are always open. Now, I have plans for a number of species that will need water access, and instead of having separate pools in each habitat, I thought it would be nice to have a natural body of water going through the middle of the reserve that we could then utilise as we needed at different stages. And this was a great plan, if I do say so myself. However, we were far from ready to begin landscaping. To give the short version, we ran out of money very fast, and then hit a significant dip in our income which left us with vast amounts of debt for several years. Thanks to the magic of video editing and perseverance, it won't be apparent in the episode itself, but considering how short and simple this build actually is, this was the longest recording so far for any habitat on this channel. That's how bad it was. Anyway, financial troubles aside, this river needed to bring 3 things to this zoo. The first was the main body of the river itself. It'd be a major feature of the landscape and home to, well, firstly our gators, so it needed to be quite wide, with some less steep banks and beaches for the animals to get in and out with some ease. 2, I need waterfalls and isolated pools for another species that will possibly be added next episode now, but these level changes and its effects on the river needed to be apparent. And 3, in creating the waterfalls, add a bit of character and dimension to the landscape so we aren't dealing with a perfectly flat zoo again, which I think I've already said I didn't like in the Highlands. Wasn't happy with it. This is kind of key to the whole future of the zoo, especially for the next episode, so I don't know why I didn't prepare better with the money situation, really. Anyway, the alligators are relatively low maintenance animals. Give them a stretch of water, some nice muddy banks and plenty of food, and they'll be happy to swim and bask and chow down until they get old and probably get eaten by their family members. I'd originally zoned off a large area of this river, extending far beyond both bridges, essentially just so that the whole river seemed active. But when I actually set out placing the barriers, I realised just how excessive that would be. And when you can only have a group of 6 adults, you don't want to be spreading them too thin. The enclosure we have now is already pushing it a little bit. There are times where it looks kind of barren because they're all at one end. So, any bigger and this might have been a problem. Alligators and crocodiles are some of the coolest, most impressive animals that still exist today. They are big, powerful, dangerous reptiles that can bring down enormous prey, in water or on land. But they are also kind of just chill guys. They want to sunbathe and have a swim. They'll say hello to you as you go by in your little boat and just hang out. I mean, why else would they live on golf courses? Given that, my priority for the fencing was mainly on keeping the guests' fingers away from the bars, rather than creating some heavy-duty T-Rex proof barrier. Of course it needs to be sturdy enough to support the weight of a large gator, who, leans on it or tries to climb it for some reason, and not fall down under it. But realistically, they're not going to be climbing 6 foot of chain link. They're not the type to ram or slash at the barriers. They're pretty content in their river. So, simple chain link, wooden beams should be fine. They're more likely to get over the water section, to be honest, but we have plenty of staff about to keep an eye on them. On the far side, we have a relatively low concrete wall that is angled inward to prevent the animals scooting up the wall. But just in case, I've also added some short railings to act as an extra layer of defence. Now, I did forget to record the water section of the fencing, which is odd because I certainly managed to record the several hours of waiting on 3 times speed for the money to come back up. I never claimed to be competent. It is a simple fence though. I've got a mesh similar to the front-facing barrier that's held in place by a series of high-tension steel cables that are attached to either side of the river. I figure if you're going to put a barrier in the river, you should probably have a way to lower it or remove it easily. So by loosening the cables, the mesh will lower into the river and allow passage over the top. I can't think of an incident where we would have to use that in this zoo, but it's nice to have the option. Sadly, like most kids who grew up in the 90s, most of what I knew about alligators and crocodiles came from Steve Irwin. So when I think about them, I always make that correlation. I think the older generations have Crocodile Dundee, which is far less impressive, because he's only a character, whereas Steve was a genuine badass, getting bitten by snakes and wrestling monsters. But it's because of him that a lot of us know anything about alligators in the first place. Like how they can close their mouths with a terrifying amount of force and hold them closed so that nothing can escape. But also that those muscles that open their mouths are comparatively small, to the point where I'm sure I've seen Steve hold onto one with one hand, keeping it shut. Seems like a bit of a design flaw, but who am I to judge? These animals have survived millions of years, basically unchanged, and hasn't held them back that far. Given that a lot of this riverbank is quite steep and I don't particularly want to watch my gators awkwardly clambering vertically to escape the depths, I've tried to block off any of the traversable sections, and some of the other bits too, with rocks. Old reliable. Now, I go back and forth on whether to add more to this. If you've watched Trondheim, you'll know that I have a bit of an addiction. I just can't stop. So there may come a time soon where this looks a little more busy, perhaps when I fill out the rest of the river. I'm holding off on that at the moment until the other species that will need access to the river have been added, so that I don't have to undo a section down the line. I added some of the enrichment in early so that I could get an idea of where needed the best access. And I've sort of figured out a preferred layout. All of the attractions, the toys, the feeders, are on the guest side, where the beaches are and the smoothest entry and exit to the water. And the bedding is all on the opposite, out the way a bit. I don't know if the alligators need bedding. I know they don't need shelter. I just added some leaves, like a little bit of a nest of sorts. And I've seen one of the females give birth on it, so it has been effective in the way that I intended at least once. And yes, given the amount of time that we were waiting for the money to come back, we did have babies already. So that's kind of giving away the intro to the next episode. The rockwork in this habitat is mainly underwater, which looks great when the water's removed, but otherwise is fairly unnoticeable. Yay! And the majority does not come higher than the soil, so this has been exposed by the river making its way through the landscape. I've also tried to use kind of realistic river dynamics by easing off on the inside of the bends, creating like beaches into the inside of those curves and having harsher drops on the outside as the current pushes around them. I think that's how it works anyway. I know we have some very intelligent people in the audience who will know better than I do, so perhaps, if I'm wrong, they'll be able to correct me. And of course, I had to litter the riverbed with the aquatic rocks. Actually, one of the only times that I've used the aquatic rocks underwater, strangely. You will notice that because this habitat is kind of out in the middle of the open plains, that it looks a little bit lonely at the moment, a bit removed from the rest of the zoo. This is something I would usually try to avoid. I like to build on from one habitat to the next, or things start to get a bit lost and unconnected. I do have plans for the areas in between this, so this won't be a permanent issue. However, I agree that there's a bit of a disconnect at the moment. At some point, as I mentioned, the rest of the water will be filled in, similarly to how the alligator habitat has been designed, but adapting it for whatever species are added along the way. I've got 2 new bridges to build, a woodland, a wetland, 6 exhibits to add that I can use to close up gaps. In fact, I'm going to add an exhibit to the space between the bison field and the coyotes, as I don't want a habitat species too close to them. That and a bathroom should close off that gap nicely. I would tell you how many more species are going to be going into this zoo, habitat species. But for the sake of avoiding one of the most cringe memes possibly in history, I think I'll leave it for now. Our alligators and how we came to acquire them. Gators are a hardy species and far from at risk, so finding somewhere that we could get hold of some was not too much of an issue. However, our goal is not just about having animals to show off, it's about doing our best for the animals in general, both the ones that we keep and the wild ones. So we have agreed to take on individuals from a rescue centre in Florida, which rehabilitates animals that have been injured by boat propellers or hunters or been hit by cars when they come on land. You thought the seals were bad, wait till you hit an alligator. Rather than taking healthy animals from the wild, it makes sense to rehome these ones that would be less able to survive or compete out in the wild population. And they can still reproduce here, so we'll also end up with some gators at full health, but they'll end up being a part of this small family group that we've got. I came into this anticipating that the alligators would have a relatively low foliage requirement. River monsters don't need a lot of trees. And maybe that was just me mixing up the American alligator with the African or Australian crocs that live in drier, more muddy biomes. Alligators live in the Everglades. It's all plants there. That being said, this is a grassland zoo. It wouldn't make sense to just have a section of the Everglades in our river, so a balance had to be found. What I've tried to do is bookend the habitat with more of a dense foliage, reeds, lily pads, willows, and then keep the section in the middle open, more muddy as if it's used more often by the animals. Obviously there's a lot of grasses along the riverbed, between the rocks, and the inaccessible sections at the rear are more overgrown as the animals don't go there to trample it. Something that also usually bothers me quite a bit is the fact that plants outside the area, if they overhang, will contribute to the coverage. Thankfully it's not an issue today because we didn't end up reaching the coverage requirement, but it's usually quite irritating. I planted willows outside the borders of the enclosure that overhang, creating some curtains to areas in the back, and cutting off some of the view behind to keep focus on the habitat itself. I also lined the rear boundary with hedges just to cover it up a bit because it's a concrete wall. Not very nice to look at. We do get a few guests. I've always had my issues with the intelligence of the guests in this game. We do have some guests that stand on the path on the opposite side, and I was trying with these barriers and the hedge and the trees to cut off their view so that they wouldn't stand there. Do you think it worked? No. They still stand there, and I bet these are the ones that are complaining about poor views. Morons. Anyway, on that positive note, I think that's enough of my voice. We aren't far off from the cinematics at the end, so be sure to stick around to see it all come together. Leave a like, subscribe to join the community, and remember to comment your suggestions for the names of today's alligators. And for some of the female pronghorns if you have any. Thank you for watching, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you again in the next one.